So here's what I have to say about this. First of all, he is only 19 years old.
Right.
He's shown himself to have a great sense of humor, so it is possible he is trolling because he grew up playing baseball. And also, I mean, Alex Rodriguez is married to Jennifer Lopez, and if you don't know who she is, then we have to have a conversation.
Well, we don't have to give him. We don't have to give him heat for not knowing, but like, it's still the minute somebody tells you that that's about to be your new boss, you're like, hey, I don't know much, but I'm really excited to meet him.
Hey, I love this kid. He's so unapologetically
He's
him.
so fun.
He's him, no matter what the situation, what the question is. He's playing with his hair. With all due respect, who is that?
Right.
I mean, that's funny.
Reminds me of the two co-hosts of your podcast.
All I'm saying is he just might be a little bit have a little Richard Jefferson in him and might be playing us a little bit.
I think it's Matt Barnes
that's
and Jackson. That's who he is.
Welcome to The Jump. I'm Rachel Nichols alongside Richard Jefferson and Matt Barnes. Coming up, the Lakers closed out their 7-game road trip last night with a win over the Hornets. Going to ask the guys what they have learned about the Lake Show without AD or LeBron. The team has gone 4-3 in their absence, so stick around for that. First, though, last month, a giant cargo ship got stuck in the Suez Canal. For those of you who don't remember back to your elementary school geography lessons, this was a big deal. The Suez is the man-made passage that lets boats slice through Europe instead of having to sail all the way down and around the tip of Africa. It's the much easier path, and it being blocked was a major issue. The idea is something that the Sixers in particular may want to think about tonight as they play the Nets in a game that will have a huge hand in determining which team gets the number 1 seed in the East. And yeah, I know it has become fashionable for teams to say seeding doesn't matter. And there's a basis for that. It's been 5 years since the East top seed was the team that even ended up in the finals. Richard, you remember which team that was? That was your team.
Yeah.
Still, this year, it sure looks important with the way the Brooklyn, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee squads are all clumped at the top of the bracket. Getting the number 1 seed for, say, Philly would be the difference between having to face both Kevin Durant and Giannis Antetokounmpo blocking your path to the finals instead of only one of them. There's also the matter of home court advantage. Philadelphia has won 80% of its home games this season, but only 59% of its road games. So yeah, having a potential Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals on their home floor would be like, well, having unblocked access to the Suez Canal. You can take your chances on the longer, harder route, but it's a lot more wear and tear on your resources, and you just might not be able to complete the journey. This holds true for more than just the teams at the top of the conference. There's also a clump of teams in the middle fighting for their own postseason positioning. You got the Hawks, who beat the Raptors last night to keep their grip on the 4 spot. This is important, for one, because it further emphasizes the terrific job that Nate McMillan has done since stepping in as interim head coach. He is 16-5 so far with Atlanta. And while Nate is too classy to take a victory lap around the 9th place Pacers team that fired him this offseason, certainly could. Number 2, though, is that if the Hawks can stick in 4th, then they will get home court in the first round, an important distinction to a young team without much playoff experience. And then there are the Heat. The defending conference champs are sitting at 6 right now, and at number 5 are the Celtics, who have won 4 straight and are finally looking more like the team that's played in 3 of the past 4 Eastern Conference Finals. Part of that is due to Marcus Smart, who has bounced back from that calf injury and last night defended like a maniac in an eventful win over Portland. And part of that is due to Jason Tatum, who last night dropped a casual 32 to follow his 53-point performance from earlier in the week. After the game, I asked Jason about his continuing recovery from COVID, which he had back in January. Please note, it is April now. Take a listen. I know that the breathing stuff lingered for you for a while. Would you say you're back at 100% yet?
Close, very close. It's just, it's a process. It takes a long time. I take an inhaler, before the game, since I tested positive. This is kind of, help with that and open up my lungs. And, I never took an inhaler before.
It's a bummer to hear he's still dealing with any of that, but good to hear he's got it under control. The Celtics will certainly need him at his best in an Eastern Conference playoffs that promises to be more competitive than we've seen in a while. Remember, people, the seas are rough out there right now. Now is the time to set your course on the best, quickest route and hope nothing gets stuck in your way. And with that, guys, let's kick off this whole Eastern Conference discussion by talking about that big showdown tonight. Nets Sixers, 7 Eastern on ESPN. Harden, Durant, and Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge all out tonight. The good news for Brooklyn is Kyrie is available to play after missing yesterday's game against the Wolves for attending to a family matter. As we look ahead with just over a month left in the regular season, which team do you trust more heading into the postseason, Brooklyn or Philly, Richard?
Well, I think right now you have to say Philly, mainly because Philly has had their whole team. We've seen everybody on their roster. Joel Embiid is back. Like, look, you have a guy like Ben Simmons who's up for Defensive Player of the Year and probably could be the leading candidate. You have Joel Embiid who was top 2, maybe top 3, at times leading for the MVP. So this team has been playing great. So you have to trust them. The Nets still have more talent. If the Nets are 100% healthy, they will be the favorites, but they have not been that. And it's been now, 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, I don't think you have to pick Philly. I think Richard's trying to bully you into picking Philly. I'm still taking Brooklyn, and the key thing is their health. Obviously, if they're healthy, but they're such a talented team, similar to an all-star team or an Olympic team where even though you haven't been with these guys for a long time, you're so talented you can make that chemistry work. And we've been harping on their defense a lot. But if you look at it, Kyrie has been playing defense. James has been playing defense. KD plays defense. So their defense, I'm not exactly sure what their numbers are, but come playoff time, these guys are going to be ready to play. Their key is their health. But I also love what Philly's been doing. Embiid being healthy and what Doc has.
It says, who do you trust more?
I trust the Nets because they have more experience and they've been there. And that's why I don't think the seeding matters so much because the Nets have plenty of championship experience. Philly is new to this, and if they're going to make that run, I think obviously a home court is more important for them.
I think the seeding doesn't matter as much for Brooklyn,
right.
Although if they are the number 2, that means you got to face either Giannis or Embiid in the first in the conference final. Second round of the East, yes, you know what I mean.
That also means those two guys have to face their three-headed monster.
Right,
too,
exactly. So. But I would say that for Philly, it's very important,
absolutely.
right? Because their margin is a little bit different.
Yep.
Their home record is a little bit different, right? The balance between that is different. And I just think the confidence level they would get would be different than the Nets' confidence
If you also think about it, if Embiid has an off night in the playoffs, most likely Philly has a good chance of losing. If KD doesn't have off nights. If Kyrie has an off night, if Harden has an off night, they can still win. You know what I mean? So it's just the Nets have a nice deck. That's all I got to say. They got a nice deck.
Must be nice. And defensively, Nick Claxton, too. I don't want to forget to shout him out. I mean, he's been really what's powering their defensive effort. So, we'll see how much playing time he ends up getting in the playoffs because they certainly have a glut of guys at that position right now. All right, with that, let's kick things off by discussing. Oh, no, we just talked about that. Keep going. We're going to move on to Jason Tatum. I was like, we're discussing the things we just discussed, but I do want to circle back to Jason Tatum because his performance against the Blazers last night, that final dagger 3 sealed the win. And look, you just heard his lingering COVID symptoms, Matt. What do you feel about the way he has been able to ramp up his game despite that late in the season, which is a version of what he did, of course, without the COVID after the All-Star break last year?
I'm a huge fan of Jason Tatum. I think he's one of the bright stars of the game. Obviously, him and Brown have identified themselves as one of the best young trios. I think a lot has to do with just Marcus Smart's presence. I know we're talking about Jason Tatum right now. His numbers post All-Star break are 27 a game. He's at 50, 40, 90 from the field, so he's definitely stepped his game up. But although Marcus Smart's numbers aren't going to overwhelm you, although he'll drop 30 some nights, his presence on the floor is so comforting. It's almost like a security blanket for that team. And I think now that they're going to get him back in the mix, this was the team that I picked post All-Star to really kind of pick their game up. And to me, to be honest with you, with all due respect to the Hawks, outside of the Hawks, if there was no Brooklyn, I could see any of those 5-6 teams possibly making the finals because the East is so wide open and wild and evenly matched.
Yeah, and look, this is Jason Tatum. I had the opportunity to interview Brad Stevens, and he said, look, with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, we want them by the time they're 27 to be 2 of the best leaders.
Forget how young they are.
Yeah, we want them to be 2 of the best leaders in the NBA.
Right.
So it's not just like, oh, they're scoring. And right now, Marcus Smart is such a heartbeat for them, and he is kind of like that defensive presence you see with guys like Draymond or, back in the day, Tony Allen. It's like he just brings that intensity. But that's where they're working with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. All the talent's there. They both had All-Star games. They're 24 years old. But it's like, okay, well, where can they improve to make our team great? And it's leadership. It's every single day. It's the competitiveness. It's holding each other and other people accountable, not just the coach doing that. So I think Jason Tatum is reaching new heights, but we also have to look for not just his game, but his leadership and how that improves.
If you missed the final minutes of that game last night because it was late on the East Coast, it is worth going back and taking a look. It was really fun ending. I really loved watching Jason Tatum and Carmelo Anthony go at each other. Right? I mean, they're so much fun, and obviously the style's so similar because Jason said after the game is very sweet. He goes, Carmelo was one of my heroes. He's one of the guys, besides Kobe Bryant, that I really grew up wanting to play like, and you could see that. Also interesting from Marcus Smart in the post-game interview session last night. He said, I heard what everyone's been saying about me. I heard them say that I've lost a step. He said, I had to recover from an injury. That's what was happening. He said, but I heard what everyone was saying. And by the way, he goes 2 times. First team all defense. I think he's going to add another one.
I'll be fine.
Add another one.
And he's still in his 20s.
And I'm good. Last night, he dives after the loose ball.
Love it.
Doesn't get it, but then he sprints down and intercepts the pass.
Fresh calf.
Richard, high school and college basketball coaches all over the country are texting this to their players today, right?
Okay, so look, I didn't see the combo. Like that play right there, you're like, come on, Marcus. But the hustle back.
Look.
And it's just like that's like the hustle back, that's next level. And then a little around the back section.
I think the fact that it all happened at once, he knew he was extra with the dive. He had to really hustle back. I love this dude.
I love it.
Hey, outside of his little flops every once in a while, I love his heart and soul.
He's got to like your favorite player's favorite player vibe to him, right?
Yeah, but I still hate it. Rich,
I hate his flops. I hate his flops.
I love his hustle.
Yes.
Love his
May his safety help. Hawks, Raptors. All right. Watch how many moves Melo puts on Peyton Pritchard. What kind of bag does Melo got here?
Oh, you don't.
Well, he saw this little guy like I saw you in college, and you know you're not ready for this.
Like, here it is. Here's your moment. You know, here's your moment. I got this.
I'm really happy what Melo's been able to do with his second act.
Ooh.
You know what I mean? I think there was a little, obviously, you know, he sat out for a little bit, but just to think that this guy had so much more in the tank and he's showing it. He's top 10 all-time scoring now and going to move up. So, I mean, hats off to Melo for kind of understanding what it's going to take to get him back in the league.
And it was Melo, but the fact that there was like so many people that were ready to push him out, but Melo did have a great change, and I think he found a great spot. I don't know if he would change a thing if you look at how he's playing and where he's at.
Dude, also the perspective that he had and gained. I talked to him several times throughout that layoff time, and not everybody would have stayed ready the way he did. It really hats off to him. All right, missed defenders. Lakers swinging the ball here. Wes Matthews pump fakes. Leans into the contact to get the call there.
I hate this call.
Horrible.
Matt, is there anywhere players are allowed to land
Terrible.
anymore?
I mean, there's a few guys that have been able to manipulate the game. You know, James putting his arm out, going to the basket, this kind of shot fake stuff that him and Steph and obviously everyone does now. But it's hard because if we jump into you, I understand. But if you're going to shot fake and then jump into someone in the air, I mean, that's just.
And in the NBA, I think they're going to change this because a player's not allowed to kick his feet outside of his normal shot motion.
Right.
When players do the rip through, that's not your normal shot motion. That's not your normal shot motion.
Right.
And you want to protect the offensive players and give them room to land.
But
you got to protect the defensive players to play there too.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think they're going to make a little shift there. Make bounce. Clips Pacers.
I was doing the game, so I was
PG back in Indy, as we mentioned. Take a look at the two-hander.
Ooh.
Hey, he's been on a mission. He came on the show, all the smoke, and looked in the camera and told everyone I'm ready. You know what I mean? I think this social media era is vicious sometimes, and I think he got the wrong end of the sword. But I think, you know, he's doing it now, but he has to do it in the playoffs. And I have a feeling this year he's going to.
Yeah, and Paul George is having a great season. His numbers are outstanding, and it's tough because you're not appreciating it because you're waiting for the postseason.
Fail.
Right.
You wanted to see him
I'm not going to say fail. I'm going to say I'm waiting for the postseason. I want to see him go do what.
I'm saying a lot of people. Well, he can't do it in the. He's doing it now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We want to see it in the playoffs.
Well, look, I mean, part of that is about when you are competing for a championship.
Right.
That's the standard, is the
That's all that
playoffs,
matters.
right? And you put yourself in that awesome position of being that good. You then need to deliver at a higher level. I do want to dig in deeper, though, on the performance last night, because 36 points, right? Dished out 8 assists. After the game, PG's teammate Marcus Morris Sr. said about his play, quote, he's playing with a chip on his shoulder. He is making an emphasis of really taking over and being the best version of himself. Matt, I want to throw this to you because you just mentioned that preseason conversation you and Steven Jackson had with yesterday, talking about he was micro betting just like the first half of one of yesterday's games, and then of course texted me after halftime being like, see, I told you I was right.
Oh, here we go.
There you go.
They never tell you when they're wrong, though.
Still here with Richard and Matt in studio with me, and let's talk about the Lakers, who just ended a 7-game road trip last night with a win over the Hornets. Kyle Kuzma leading the way with 24 points. Dennis Schroeder added 19. LA has gone 4-3 on this trip without Anthony Davis or LeBron in the lineup. So, Matt, what have you learned about this team in this stretch without their stars?
They stayed above water, and that's what you want. Obviously, missing 2 stars, the best duo in the game. But I really like is this is going to help come playoff time. These guys are all going to be in rhythm. You know, it's not going to take Braun long to get back in rhythm. We'll see how long it takes AD to get back in rhythm. But they're going to need that third guy, and whether it's Kuzma, whether it's Schroeder, it can be Harrell sometimes. To me, their most important aspect is being healthy, and no matter how, like I said earlier, no matter how far they slide down, if they're healthy, they're still going to be the favorites in the West.
Now, I'm going to speak directly to Laker fans, right? I'm going to speak directly to...
It normally doesn't go...
You're in LA.
I know. Be careful. No, I understand.
I got death threats for doing that.
Yeah, people with head tattoos, with stuff like that. Like, look, I'm going to speak directly to Laker fans. You will not see the impact of Drummond until LeBron and AD are back.
Yes,
Don't be like, oh,
there was some panicking last night. There was some panic.
Oh, what's Drummond? And I'm like, guys, LeBron James is one of the greatest passers this game has ever seen. Drummond needs that. Yep. Anthony Davis is one of the most skilled big men that's going to allow for less than 3 people to be trying to box out Drummond. If you thought that Dwight Howard was a key part to your championship, Drummond is better. Yes. Drummond is like a younger, I don't want to say a young Dwight because Dwight was a monster, but he's like a younger Dwight Howard. Yeah. So
he was the best pickup to me come deadline time, buyout situation.
But you're not going to see that now until you've got LeBron out there on the floor, until you got Anthony Davis. So before you start getting all crazy about like Drummond's numbers, understand it'll skyrocket.
And I give him credit, by the way, because it would be easy to sort of fall into it. Well, where do I fit on this team? Okay, now what's going on? And he last night was very much like, yeah, I'm here for the defense, and the offense will come, and all of that. And it seemed kind of to have an even feel about it.
Yeah.
And Dennis Schroeder, by the way, playing as well as he had, matters for them. And there was a little bit of a question after the trade deadline. It was his name that was in those talks in the swap for Kyle Lowry. The sticking point might have been Talen Horton-Tucker, but Schroeder's contract is also going to be up this summer. So that was seen as kind of an exchange for expiring versus expiring. He could have taken it personally, and instead, look at what he has been doing. I covered their game over the weekend in Brooklyn, and when he got tossed out with Kyrie, look, of course, you would say the winner is the Lakers if you're losing Schroeder and Kyrie.
At that time in the game.
But at that time in the game, he was the leading scorer.
I had a chance to talk, Chris Paul is good friends, and our kids are good friends, and we talked this offseason about how much he loves Dennis Schroeder, one of the most competitive guys on both ends of the floor, always working hard. He said he just loved playing with him, and you're seeing that over in LA. This kid works hard. You can say what you want about him. You can say what you want about the hair dye and looking like Gizmo sometimes, but this dude goes out and plays his butt off every single night, and you're going to need that going in the playoffs.
Dennis the Menace, as his teammates call him. All right, I want to shift gears and head to the college ranks for this next topic. Very near to Richard's heart. Also, as I've mentioned many times on the show, half of our staff went to the University of Arizona, so this has been a big topic of conversation around here.
Look at those colors, they're beautiful.
U of A fired men's basketball coach Sean Miller last week. Jason Shear of the Wildcat Authority website reports university officials have hit the reset button and are now reevaluating their search because various former Arizona players, and we're talking about big NBA names here, voiced their displeasure with the report that Gonzaga's lead assistant, Tommy Lloyd, was in the pole position to get the job. The news leaked before former Wildcats Damon Stoudemire, Jason Terry, Miles Simon even had a chance to formally interview for the job. Now, Richard spoke to his fellow Zona alum, again, an NBA favorite, Gilbert Arenas, about this search on social media, and we had to put it on TV.
How did you guys find this, Gilbert?
On the internet.
Who would you pick for the Arizona coach?
Damon Stoudemire.
Damon Stoudemire. Why Damon Stoudemire?
I mean, he's been coaching for a while now. He's established himself. He's turned the whole program around, where he went. So, I mean, he has the credentials. An assistant coach doesn't have credentials.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, anyone that played should be considered first.
Absolutely.
So, Richard, that's kind of what we wanted to dive into a little bit more, because you have guys like Damon Stoudemire, who he's talking about, Juwan Howard, as we know. It took a while for him to get that job, and then, of course, succeeding. And then on the other hand, you've got guys like Steve Kerr or Steve Nash, who just sort of walked into doing coaching jobs. So where do you think the bar or line is for former players? Is it easier in the NBA, harder in college? Patrick Ewing, we know, had a hard time until he got that.
And that was the first name I was going to say. Patrick Ewing is one of the 50 greatest players in NBA history, and he coached for 10, 12 years and couldn't get an NBA job, and finally he went to his alma mater. And again,
did well.
Did well. And even when you talk about the WNBA, Adia Barnes just took the University of Arizona to a national championship game. And so you have these players that are forced to go do these jobs, and you understand, and Damon, you see, was an assistant coach. It is very hard for ex-NBA players because it's like, even though you played 18 years or 15 years, they're like, well, you haven't been coaching. And it's like, well,
we've been playing.
I've been playing, and I've been gaining experience that way. And I don't think a lot of times that experience gives you don't give enough credit to that. But it is going to be very, very difficult. I know the alumni want something, and when you look at the success of a Juwan Howard and Patrick Ewing and of a Adia Barnes at their alma maters, that's where these Damon Sotomayor, Jason Terry, Miles Simon, Josh Pastors are standing up. And UCLA had a similar thing where they kind of wanted Earl Watson.
Yeah. It's a tough situation from a standpoint, and they always want to throw, well, you don't have experience. But if you think about it, most of these guys are point guards. And if you know, point guards are coaches on the floor. I mean, these guys are neck and neck with their head coach in the NBA. What I really love is how Carolina, Duke, Kentucky, they keep it in-house most of the time. They let their players come up under, and then they have legendary coaches, and then, they raise their guys up. For some reason, other schools out west don't really do that. And whether we're talking college or NBA, it's tough. And I think we need more representation a little higher up to be able to possibly have coaches or players come back and coach.
And I think the one thing that I think a lot of people are struggling, I don't know if that article, it was like a random blog that said something about Lloyd, and so you don't know how much truth that is. But when you look at, did they have a plan? Obviously, the Sean Miller thing has been floating, and Sean Miller and the school has parted ways. But when you look at the numbers, like this Arizona program has been one of the top programs over the last 30 years. But when you look at the entire situation at North Carolina, they had a plan. And Roy Williams was like, I think Hubert is going to be the best individual to take over this job. And it didn't take very long. And you brought in a former player that had been putting in his dues. And so to see one of the top tier programs like North Carolina, and I believe Arizona is in that level, especially on the Western United States, we didn't really have as much of a plan as we should, given the size of our program.
You guys have both been coached by former players. I mean, I'm just going off the top of my head, Ty Lue, Doc Rivers, but there's many more. What have you noticed is the difference when a guy has been in the NBA, has been in the league for a long time? Steve Kerr obviously won many rings before he got to the Warriors. Steve Nash, Hall of Famer. What's the difference when guys like that are coaching you?
I would say they know your body, so they know rest, and then they know when to implement themselves and when to get out of the way. Because you're coaching grown men most of the time, and if you have an intelligent team, it's probably, Steve Kerr says some of the best coaching he does when he steps back.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Knowing
so I think two things right there is they know your body, rest, and the grind it takes because they've actually been through that grind. And then two, they know when to implement themselves and when to take a step back. Sometimes when guys haven't played, they want to keep their hands on the game the entire time, and NBA players hate nothing worse than that. Right. Coach always wanting to call a player, always wanting to be a part. You got to trust the players on the floor.
And there's no one route, right? I mean, there are guys who never played who made great coaches.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But there's no one route in the other direction either. Right. There's guys who are former players who have made great.
And that's the one thing that, and Matt and I, our careers have gone so many different ways, but a lot of times with players, you have the ability to relate to players. Even as a broadcaster, I can talk from a person that was a sixth man, that was a starter, that was a leading scorer, that was a veteran on a bench. So I literally over the 17 years that I played, I covered almost every role that you could have. Yep. So then when I go as a coach, I can go talk to a player like, hey, you're a starter. This is what is expected. If you're a top scorer or you have to kind of make way for the younger guys, this is what is expected because you've been in all those roles and you have the ability to relate. So that's where players, even when they're not coaching, they're gaining advantage and they're gaining experience doing that because they've been in those roles that they're now having to coach.
I like Richard if he was coaching a team, which by the way,
never
should not coach a team,
ever.
But he would just be like, hey, you remember seeing that Vince Carter highlight? I was the guy behind him.
Impressionable young minds should not be coached by
formed by you.
No.
Matt, yes or no? Coach in your future?
No, I just coach my kids. I couldn't handle other people.
There we go.
He couldn't handle you.
Coming up, we're going to switch gears here.
What it's capable of. But if you're watching this, listening or tuning in, I just want you to know that your life has value, so much value, that they're trying so hard to make you feel otherwise. My life has value. My life has value
before I played for the Celtics and real long after. At some point, you realize what you're dealing with. The power has and always will be with the people. You got to stand up and fight. What other solution do we have? That's really all I got.
Really, really, really powerful. Welcome back to The Jump. I'm Rachel Nichols, still here with Richard Jefferson, Matt Barnes. We are now joined by Shanae Ogumake, and the comments we just heard from Jaylen Brown were, of course, reacting to the events that occurred in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota on Sunday. Dante Wright, a black man, 20 years old, a father, was shot and killed by police during a traffic stop after the Timberwolves postponed their game Monday. The game with the Nets was played on Tuesday. Both teams wore Justice and Liberty and then capitalized "For All" t-shirts during warmups. There was a moment of silence before tip-off for Dante Wright. Authorities said that the officer who shot Wright was arrested today and will be charged with second-degree manslaughter. Here is Kevin Durant after the game.
At this point, is you just really don't understand what's going on around here. You know, it's different stories every single day about families' lives getting altered because of police brutality. And I mean, at this point, I really don't know what to say.
Shanae, I feel like we've had these conversations way too many times, decade after decade, year after year.